Keiko Tanaka pressed her face against the transport truck's window, watching the American countryside roll past in endless green fields dotted with farmhouses that seemed impossibly prosperous. As a former textile worker from Nagoya, she had expected America to show signs of wartime deprivation, but instead she saw abundance that defied everything Japanese propaganda had claimed. "Look at those houses," whispered Yuki, the young teacher captured during the Saipan evacuation. "They all have electric wires, even the smallest ones." The truck convoy carrying 38 Japanese women prisoners turned through gates marked Camp Jerome, Arkansas. Keiko's stomach clenched as guards approached, but their demeanor seemed more administrative than hostile, a far cry from the brutal treatment she had been conditioned to expect. "Welcome to Jerome," announced Sergeant Dorothy Miller in carefully pronounced Japanese. "You will be processed, assigned quarters, and introduced to camp routines." As they disembarked, Keiko noticed something peculiar: the sound of machinery humming from various buildings, and the distinct smell of soap and clean laundry carried on the Arkansas breeze. Through one building's open doors, she glimpsed what appeared to be rows of white appliances. "What are those machines?" she asked another prisoner in Japanese. "I do not know, but they're making noise like the textile mills back home." During processing, each woman received a numbered card, medical examination, and a packet of supplies that included more soap than Keiko had seen in months. The abundance was bewildering. In Japan, soap had become a luxury item reserved for special occasions. "Tomorrow, you will receive orientation about camp services," explained Sergeant Miller. "We have educational programs, recreational activities, and various facilities to help maintain health and morale." That evening in the barracks, Keiko lay on a real mattress, softer than anything she had slept on as a free worker in Japan, listening to other women speculate about their fate. "Did you see all those electrical wires?" asked Sachiko, a former nurse. "Every building has power. In Japan, only the wealthiest districts had such electricity." "Maybe it is propaganda," suggested another voice, making us think America is richer than it really is. But Keiko remembered the faces of the American staff, tired but well-fed, wearing clean clothes that showed no signs of rationing or deprivation. Whatever America was, it was not the war-devastated nation Japanese leaders had described. Outside, the mysterious humming of machinery continued through the night, promising revelations that would challenge everything these women understood about their captive civilization. Morning brought Keiko's first glimpse of what would become the most astonishing discovery of her captivity. Following Sergeant Miller toward the orientation building, the group passed a long, low structure from which emerged the rhythmic sounds of churning water and mechanical rotation. "What is that building?" asked Yuki in broken English. "The laundry facility," Miller replied matter-of-factly. "One of our most popular services." Through the building's windows, Keiko caught sight of something that made her stop walking entirely. Rows of white machines, each the size of a small desk, filled with churning water and operated by both American staff and Japanese prisoners who appeared to be working voluntarily. "Those machines," Keiko began, then stopped, lacking words for what she was witnessing. "Electric washing machines," Miller explained, noticing their amazement. "Each one can clean 20 pounds of laundry in 30 minutes. We have 12 units operating daily." The concept defied comprehension. In Japan, laundry meant hours of hand scrubbing in cold water with precious soap rationed by the government. These machines promised to complete the same work in minutes using abundant hot water and unlimited soap. "Impossible, whispered Sachiko. "No one has such machines." "Would you like to see them in operation?" Miller asked with obvious pride. Inside the laundry facility, Keiko experienced something approaching religious revelation. The machines were even more impressive up close. Gleaming white appliances with glass windows through which she could watch clothes tumbling in sudsy water heated to temperatures that would have been impossible to achieve by hand. Margaret Thompson, the facility supervisor, demonstrated the operation with enthusiastic precision. "You add clothes here, soap here, set the timer, and the machine does everything else. Hot water, agitation, rinse, spin dry." "Spin dry," Keiko asked, mesmerized. Watch this. Thompson opened a machine that had just completed its cycle. The clothes inside were nearly dry, requiring only brief hanging rather than the day-long drying process familiar to the prisoners. A Japanese woman named Sachiko, who had been working in the facility for several weeks, approached their group. Tanaka-san, you will not believe this. They pay us to learn these machines. American money for doing laundry that is easier than anything we did at home. They pay prisoners. Script that can be used in the camp store. But more than that, they're teaching us skills. Sachiko's eyes shone with possibility. Thompson says these machines are common in American homes. Ordinary families own them. The implications staggered Keiko. If regular American families possess technology that seemed magical to Japanese workers, what did that say about the relative prosperity of the two nations? Can we touch them? Asked Yuki tentatively. Thompson smiled warmly. Honey, by the end of the week, you will be operating them yourself. We believe in hands-on learning. As Keiko ran her fingers over the smooth metal surface of an electric washing machine, she realized that everything she had been told about American technological capabilities had been catastrophically wrong. 3 weeks into her imprisonment, Keiko stood beside electric washing machine number 5, carefully measuring soap powder under Mrs. Thompson's patient supervision. The routine had become familiar, but the wonder had not faded. Every cycle still felt like witnessing magic. Perfect amount, Keiko, Mrs. Thompson praised. You are becoming one of our best operators. Around the laundry facility, a dozen Japanese women worked alongside American staff. Their initial amazement replaced by growing expertise. The transformation went beyond technical skills. These women moved with confidence that had not existed during their first terrified days at Camp Jerome. Thompson, Keiko said carefully in improving English, I have a question. These machines, how many American families own them? Oh, about 30% of households nationwide. More in cities, fewer in rural areas. But the number's growing fast. Keiko tried to process the mathematics. If America could spare electric washing machines for a prison camp, while 30% of civilian families own them privately, what did that suggest about American industrial capacity? That afternoon brought an unexpected revelation. Thompson announced that several prisoners would be selected for advanced training on newer machine models being delivered to the camp. The Bendix automatic washer, she explained, gesturing toward a gleaming appliance that seemed even more sophisticated than their current machines. Fully automated cycles, multiple temperature settings, and larger capacity. Sachiko raised her hand. Thompson, why do you give prisoners such expensive equipment? Because, Mrs. Thompson replied thoughtfully, we have learned that teaching useful skills keeps people productive and hopeful. Besides, these machines will be standard in American homes within 10 years. We are preparing you for the future. The casual assumption that Japanese prisoners might need to understand American domestic technology struck Keiko as either remarkably optimistic or subtly manipulative. Did the Americans expect them to remain in the United States permanently? Thompson asked Yuki quietly, what happens to these machines after the war? Some will stay here if the camp becomes a vocational school. Others will be donated to communities that need laundry facilities. Nothing goes to waste in America. That evening, as Keiko folded clothes that had been washed in minutes rather than hours, she composed a mental letter to her sister in Nagoya, a letter she might never send, describing miracles that might never be believed. Dear Miho, she imagined writing, today I operated a machine that washes 20 pounds of laundry in 30 minutes using unlimited hot water and soap. The Americans have hundreds of such machines and are teaching enemy prisoners to use them. I no longer understand what kind of war we were fighting. Outside the barracks, the familiar hum of electric washing machines continued into the night. 12 units running constantly to handle laundry for prisoners who were being taught that their captor civilization operated on principles of abundance rather than scarcity. The question that haunted Keiko was whether Japan could ever compete with a nation that casually provided luxury appliances to its enemies. 6 months later, Keiko received permission to write her first letter home through Red Cross channels. Sitting in a laundry facility during her break, surrounded by the gentle hum of electric washing machines, she struggled to find words that would not sound like fantasy to her family in wartime Japan. "Dear honored family," she began carefully, "I am healthy and well treated. The Americans have facilities here that demonstrate their industrial capabilities far exceed what we were told." How could she explain that prisoners had access to technology most Japanese civilians had never imagined? That she had learned to operate machines which completed in minutes what took Japanese women hours of backbreaking labor? Tanaka-san called Hannah, a former factory supervisor who had become the camp's unofficial laundry coordinator. "Thompson wants to discuss the new training program with you." In the supervisor's office, Mrs. Thompson spread out technical manuals and photographs showing even more advanced washing machines. "Keiko, your mechanical aptitude is exceptional. We are starting a program to train selected prisoners as appliance repair technicians." She pointed to detailed diagrams. "These skills will be valuable wherever you end up after the war." The implications were clear. The Americans expected some prisoners to remain in the United States, establishing lives in a country where electric washing machines were becoming household necessities. "Thompson," Keiko asked hesitantly, "may I ask personal question?" "Of course. Your family, do they own a washing machine like these?" Thompson smiled. "We have a smaller model at home. My husband bought it last year to help while I have been working at the camp. Cost about $300. Expensive, but worth it for the time it saves." $300 represented more money than Keiko had earned in 2 years as a textile worker in Japan. The casual mention of such an expenditure revealed economic realities that challenged everything she had understood about relative national prosperity. That afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Captain Robert Morrison, the camp's technical education coordinator, toured the laundry facility with obvious pride in the program's success. "Ladies," he announced to the assembled workers, "I have news about post-war opportunities. Several appliance manufacturers have expressed interest in hiring trained technicians, regardless of national origin." The room fell silent. The possibility of remaining in America, working with the miraculous machines they had learned to operate, seemed both appealing and treasonous. Captain Morrison asked Sachiko carefully, "What about our families in Japan?" "That is a personal decision each of you will make when the war ends. But I want you to know that America values skilled workers who understand modern technology." After the captain left, the women continued their work in contemplative silence. Each wash cycle represented not just clean clothes, but a glimpse into a future where manual labor might be replaced by mechanical convenience. "Keiko," Hannah said quietly, "sometimes I wonder if we are prisoners or students." Looking around the facility at machines that seemed miraculous, American supervisors who treated them with professional respect, and fellow prisoners learning skills that might provide futures beyond anything possible in devastated Japan, Keiko realized the distinction had become meaningless. She was being educated by her captors in technologies that proved their civilization's superiority more effectively than any military victory could have achieved. 1 year after her arrival at Camp Jerome, Keiko stood before a congressional committee in Washington, D.C., testifying about prisoner treatment and technological education programs. The irony was not lost on her. A former enemy explaining to American legislators why teaching prisoners to use washing machines served national interests. "Tanaka," said Representative Johnson from Arkansas, "you have described extensive technical training provided to Japanese prisoners. Some congressmen question whether such resources should have been devoted to enemy nationals." Keiko, now wearing a simple but well-tailored dress and speaking confident English, chose her words carefully. "Congressman, learning to operate American machinery taught us more about your country's capabilities than any propaganda could have achieved." Explain that statement. "When I arrived, I believed American industry was primitive compared to Japanese manufacturing. Operating electric washing machines showed me the reverse was true. Japan's entire textile industry could not produce machines like those casually provided to prisoners." In the gallery, she spotted Mrs. Thompson and several other Camp Jerome staff members who had traveled to Washington to support the program's continuation. Representative Davis from California leaned forward. Are you suggesting that demonstrating technological superiority was a form of psychological warfare? I am suggesting that experiencing American abundance convinced me and many others that resistance was futile. Not because we were beaten, but because we had been competing against a civilization we had never understood. The questioning continued for 2 hours, with Keiko explaining how washing machine technology had served as a window into American industrial might that made Japanese wartime propaganda appear absurd in retrospect. Tanaka asked Chairman Williams, how many of your fellow prisoners chose to remain in America? Approximately 70% applied for permanent residency, not from fear of returning to Japan, but from desire to participate in a society where ordinary families own appliances we had considered miraculous. After the hearing, Keiko met with Captain Morrison and Mrs. Thompson to discuss the program's future. The committee seemed supportive, Morrison observed. Your testimony helped them understand that technical education serves strategic purposes beyond simple prisoner welfare. Keiko, I have news. Thompson smiled. Whirlpool Corporation has offered you a position as regional training coordinator for their new Pacific operations. They want someone who understands both American technology and Japanese work culture. The offer represented everything Keiko had never dared imagine. A career built on skills learned in captivity, working with machines that had once seemed impossible, in a country that had transformed her from enemy to valued employee. There is one condition, she said carefully. I want to help establish training centers in Japan. Bring this technology to women who have never imagined such possibilities. That is exactly what they hope you will do, Morrison replied. Bridge the gap between American innovation and Japanese implementation. 6 months later, Keiko stood in a new training facility in Tokyo, watching Japanese women experience the same amazement she had felt upon first seeing electric washing machines at Camp Jerome. Can we really take one home? Asked a young worker, echoing Keiko's own first question. Someday, Keiko replied, remembering her journey from prisoner to instructor. But first, let me teach you how they work. As the familiar hum of Elec trick washing machines filled the Tokyo facility, Keiko reflected on the strange path that had brought her here, from enemy prisoner to cultural ambassador, spreading American technology through the patient instruction she had received from captors who had understood that true victory came not from defeating enemies, but from transforming them into willing participants in a superior civilization. 2 years after establishing the Tokyo Training Center, Keiko received a letter that would change everything again. The envelope bore the seal of the U.S. State Department, and inside was an invitation that seemed impossible. The American government wanted her to testify before the United Nations about technology transfer as a tool for post-war reconstruction. Tanaka, the letter read, your unique experience bridging American industrial methods with Japanese implementation makes you invaluable for discussions about peaceful technology sharing between former enemy nations. Sitting in her Tokyo apartment, surrounded by photographs from Camp Jerome and technical manuals for the latest American appliances, Keiko marveled at the journey that had brought her here. 3 years ago, she had been a prisoner learning to operate washing machines. Now she was being asked to help shape international policy. Tanaka-san, said her assistant Miho, entering with the day's correspondence. The Mitsubishi representatives are here for the demonstration. In the training center's main hall, a dozen Japanese executives watched as Keiko demonstrated the latest Bendix automatic washer, the same model she had first encountered as a prisoner, now being manufactured under license in Japan. Gentlemen, she explained in formal Japanese, this technology represents more than mechanical innovation. It demonstrates a philosophy of abundance rather than scarcity, efficiency rather than endurance. Takeshi, Mitsubishi's chief engineer, raised his hand. Tanaka, our studies suggest these machines require too much electricity and water for practical Japanese household use. Keiko smiled, remembering similar objections from the early days. Sir, that assumes Japanese households will remain as resource-constrained as they were during wartime. American families did not always have abundant electricity either. Infrastructure can be built to support improved living standards. After the demonstration, she walked through Tokyo's rebuilding districts, noting the gradual changes. Electric wires were being strung to more neighborhoods. Water systems expanded and small appliance shops began appearing. Signs that Japan was slowly catching up to American domestic technology standards. That evening, a familiar face appeared at her door. Sachiko, her former colleague from Camp Jerome, now representing General Electric's Asian operations. Keiko, Sachiko said, settling into the small apartment sitting area, I have a proposal. GE wants to establish a joint venture with Japanese manufacturers. They need someone who understands both cultures to manage the transition. What kind of joint venture? Manufacturing washing machines in Japan for the Asian market using American technology, Japanese craftsmanship, and management by people who learned both systems as prisoners of war. The irony was perfect. Former prisoners using skills learned in captivity to bring American technology to the nation that had sent them to war. There is something else, Sachiko continued. Thompson is retiring from government service. She wants to join our operation as technical director. Says working with Japanese women was the most rewarding experience of her career. Keiko pictured Mrs. Thompson, patient teacher, unlikely friend, symbol of American kindness that had transformed enemies into allies through the simple act of sharing knowledge. When do we start? She asked. Within months, the planning began. Former Camp Jerome prisoners who had chosen to remain in America were recruited as technical advisors. Japanese engineers who had studied American methods joined the team. Mrs. Thompson arrived in Tokyo with her family, ready to spend her retirement building bridges between the nations that had once been at war. The project represented something unprecedented. Enemies turned allies, collaborating to improve the lives of ordinary people through technology that had once symbolized the vast gap between their civilizations. 5 years after the war's end, Keiko stood in a modern factory outside Osaka, watching the first Japanese manufactured Bendix washing machines roll off an assembly line operated by women who had learned American techniques in prisoner camps. The sight represented something unprecedented, former enemies collaborating to bring advanced technology to ordinary Japanese families. Production target achieved, announced Mrs. Thompson, now serving as technical director and speaking surprisingly good Japanese. 200 units this week, all meeting American quality standards. Around the factory floor, former Camp Jerome prisoners worked alongside American technicians and Japanese engineers. Their diverse expertise creating manufacturing methods that neither country could have developed alone. Tanaka-san called Hannah, now the plant's quality control supervisor. We have visitors from the Ministry of Trade. The government delegation toured the facility with obvious amazement, taking notes as Keiko explained how prisoner-trained workers had become the backbone of Japan's emerging appliance industry. Tanaka, said Minister Sato, this operation challenges traditional assumptions about technology transfer. Usually defeated nations receive obsolete equipment. You are manufacturing cutting-edge appliances. Minister San, Keiko replied, Americans taught us these skills not as charity, but as investment. They understood that prosperous trading partners serve everyone's interests better than impoverished enemies. That afternoon brought news that validated their approach. Orders for 5,000 washing machines from department stores across Japan, with waiting lists suggesting demand far exceeded supply. The middle class is growing, observed Mrs. Thompson as they reviewed the orders. Families want the same conveniences that American prisoners demonstrated during the war. The statement contained layers of irony that were not lost on anyone present. Technology originally used to comfort enemy prisoners was now driving Japan's economic recovery and creating the foundation for future prosperity. Thompson, Keiko asked, do you ever regret teaching prisoners skills that now compete with American manufacturers? Competition makes everyone better. Besides, These machines will be sold throughout Asia, creating markets American companies never could have reached alone. That evening, Keiko received a telegram from Captain Morrison, now working for the Marshall Plan in Europe. Congratulations on factory success. Your model being studied for technology transfer programs in Germany and Italy. Former enemies becoming partners through shared knowledge. As she walked home through Tokyo streets increasingly filled with electric lights and modern conveniences, Keiko reflected on the transformation her country was experiencing. The devastation of defeat was giving way to prosperity built on lessons learned from captors who had understood that lasting victory came through rebuilding rather than revenge. At home, she found a package from America. The latest Whirlpool catalog sent by former Camp Jerome staff who had remained friends across continents. Flipping through pages showing washing machines, dryers, refrigerators, and other appliances, she realized these were not just consumer goods, but symbols of a lifestyle Japan was slowly adopting. The war had ended with American victory, but the peace was being built through something more valuable, the patient transfer of knowledge that lifted former enemies toward prosperity rather than grinding them into permanent submission. The factory hummed with activity, each machine rolling off the assembly line representing not just clean laundry for Japanese families, but proof that former adversaries could work together toward common goals. Women who had once feared American captivity now operated equipment alongside the very people who had first taught them, creating something neither side could have built alone. As Keiko reviewed production schedules for the coming months, she understood that the washing machines were more than appliances. They were instruments of peace, transforming nations through the simple recognition that everyone deserved access to technology that made life easier, cleaner, and more hopeful. 10 years after her capture, Keiko stood before the United Nations General Assembly in New York, addressing delegates from 60 nations about the role of technology transfer in post-war reconstruction. Behind her, a large photograph showed Camp Jerome's laundry facility, the place where former enemies had first learned to operate machines that would transform their understanding of what civilization could offer. Honorable delegates, she began, I stand before you as proof that the most powerful weapon against future conflict is not military strength, but the patient sharing of knowledge that lifts all nations toward prosperity. In the audience, she spotted familiar faces. Thompson, now retired but serving as a UN consultant. Captain Morrison, representing the State Department. And Sachiko, whose company had expanded operations throughout Asia. The electric washing machine, Keiko continued, taught Japanese prisoners more about American capabilities than any interrogation could have achieved. We learned that our captors possessed not just superior weapons, but superior ways of living that we wanted to share rather than destroy. After her speech, delegates from developing nations approached with questions about adapting similar programs for their own reconstruction efforts. Tanaka asked the delegate from the Philippines, how do we convince former colonial powers to share advanced technology rather than maintaining economic dominance? By demonstrating that prosperous partners create larger markets than impoverished subjects, Keiko replied. America profits more from selling washing machines to middle-class Japanese families than they ever could from keeping Japan weak and dependent. That evening at a reception hosted by the Japanese delegation, Keiko found herself in conversation with Secretary of State Dean Acheson, who had been instrumental in approving the original prisoner education programs. Tanaka, your success story has influenced policy across multiple administrations. We have learned that investing in former enemies' prosperity serves American interests better than punitive occupation. Secretary, the credit belongs to people like Mrs. Thompson, who saw prisoners as potential students rather than permanent enemies, and to prisoners like you who chose learning over resistance. As the evening wound down, Keiko walked through New York streets, marveling at the city's obvious prosperity, the very abundance that had seemed impossible when viewed from wartime Japan. Electric signs advertised appliances that were becoming common worldwide, testament to an industrial capacity that had overwhelmed not through force, but through demonstration. 6 months later, Keiko opened her third training facility, this one in Seoul, where Korean women learned to operate the same washing machines that had once amazed Japanese prisoners. The technology was spreading throughout Asia, carried by people who had experienced its transformative power firsthand. "Can we take one home?" asked a young Korean worker, her eyes wide with the same wonder Keiko had felt years earlier at Camp Jerome. "Someday," Keiko replied, remembering her own journey from prisoner to teacher to international consultant. "But first, let me show you how they work." As electric washing machines hummed to life in Seoul, just as they had in Arkansas, Tokyo, and dozens of other locations where former enemies were learning to build better lives through shared knowledge, Keiko realized that the most lasting victory of World War II had not been military conquest, but the patient demonstration that prosperity was possible for everyone. The war had ended with American triumph, but the peace was being built through washing machines, one cycle at a time, teaching the world that the best way to defeat enemies was to help them become friends through the simple recognition that everyone deserved access to technology that made life easier, cleaner, and more hopeful. Standing in the Seoul facility, surrounded by the familiar sounds of electric washing machines operated by women discovering new possibilities, Keiko Tanaka, former prisoner, current teacher, eternal student of human possibility, smiled and began another lesson in the transformative power of shared knowledge. The transformation of Asia's domestic technology landscape accelerated as Keiko's network of training facilities expanded beyond Japan and Korea. By the mid-1950s, her model of prisoner-trained instructors teaching civilian populations had become a blueprint for economic development throughout the region. In Manila, former Camp Jerome prisoner Yuki established a facility that trained Filipino women not just in washing machine operation, but in appliance repair and maintenance. The skills created employment opportunities that had not existed before the war, building middle-class prosperity through technical education. In Taipei, Sachiko partnered with local manufacturers to produce machines adapted for Asian households, slightly smaller than American models, but using the same fundamental technology. The modifications proved that innovation could flow both directions, with Asian engineers improving upon American designs. Back in Tokyo, Keiko's original training center had evolved into something more ambitious, a technical college offering comprehensive courses in domestic technology, electrical engineering, and business management. The student body included not just Japanese women, but young people from across Asia seeking skills that would lift their families out of poverty. Mrs. Thompson, now in her 60s but still energetic, served as dean of the technical programs. Her decades of experience bridging American and Asian educational methods created curriculum that balanced theoretical knowledge with practical application. One afternoon, as Keiko reviewed enrollment applications in her office, Thompson entered with news that would mark another milestone. The Smithsonian Institution in Washington wants to create an exhibit about the Camp Jerome program. They're calling it one of the most successful cultural exchange initiatives in American history. Keiko smiled at the irony. Cultural exchange through prisoner of war camps. Only in America could such a thing be celebrated. They want to include one of the original washing machines from Jerome, Thompson continued, and they want you to speak at the opening. The exhibit would tell the full story, from initial suspicion and fear through amazement and education to the economic transformation that followed. It would acknowledge the uncomfortable truth that sometimes the most profound learning happens between enemies forced together by circumstances. That evening, Keiko walked through Tokyo's bustling commercial districts, now fully rebuilt and glowing with neon signs advertising the very appliances she had first encountered as a terrified prisoner. Department store windows displayed washing machines, refrigerators, and televisions, each representing not just consumer goods, but symbols of Japan's remarkable recovery. She stopped at a small electronics shop where a young couple debated which washing machine to purchase for their new apartment. The husband pointed to an American brand, but the wife preferred a Japanese model that cost less but offered similar features. "We can afford the good one," the husband insisted. "My mother washed clothes by hand her entire life. I want better for you." Keiko moved on before they noticed her watching, but their conversation echoed in her mind. The transformation was complete. Technology that had once seemed miraculous to prisoners was now expected by ordinary families. The abundance that had amazed her at Camp Jerome had become the standard to which Japanese manufacturers aspired. At home, she drafted her acceptance letter to the Smithsonian. She would attend the exhibit opening and tell the story honestly, including the fear and propaganda, the amazement and learning, the transformation that occurred when enemies chose to see each other as human beings rather than monsters. The washing machines had been instruments of that transformation, mechanical teachers that demonstrated through simple function what words could never convey. That American prosperity was real, not propaganda. That abundance could be achieved through industrial efficiency. That former enemies could become partners in building a better world. As she sealed the envelope, Keiko reflected on the strange journey from textile worker to prisoner to teacher to international consultant. Every step had been unexpected, often uncomfortable, but ultimately meaningful. The machines that had once seemed impossible now hummed in homes across Asia, each cycle cleaning clothes and building futures. The Smithsonian exhibit opening in 1958 drew crowds that exceeded all expectations. Visitors lined up around the building to see the original washing machine from Camp Jerome, now preserved behind glass alongside photographs, letters, and testimonies from the women who had learned to operate it. Keiko stood before the assembled crowd, now 53 years old, her hair touched with gray, but her voice still strong. She spoke not from notes, but from memory, recounting the journey that had begun 15 years earlier on a transport truck rolling through Arkansas countryside. When I first saw these machines, she told the audience, I thought they were instruments of propaganda, devices meant to make us believe American lies about their prosperity. But as I learned to operate them, I realized the lie had been what we were told in Japan. The machines were real. The abundance was real. And the generosity of sharing that knowledge with prisoners was real. In the crowd sat Mrs. Thompson, now retired and living in Virginia. Beside her were Sachiko, Hannah, and Yuki, all of whom had traveled from Asia for the ceremony. Their presence together represented the enduring friendships formed in those Arkansas laundry rooms. The exhibit included a recreation of the Camp Jerome facility, complete with the hum of washing machines playing through hidden speakers. Visitors could read letters the prisoners had attempted to write home, struggling to describe miracles their families would never believe. Interactive displays explained the technical specifications, the industrial capacity required, and the economic philosophy behind providing such equipment to prisoners. But the most powerful element was a video presentation featuring interviews with former prisoners and their American instructors. Women who had once been enemies spoke about each other with obvious affection and respect, their shared experience creating bonds that transcended national boundaries. After the ceremony, a young reporter approached Keiko with a question that cut to the heart of the story. Ms. Tanaka, some critics say the prisoner education program was manipulative, designed to create propaganda rather than genuinely help captives. How do you respond? Keiko considered her answer carefully. If teaching useful skills, treating people with dignity, and sharing knowledge is manipulation, then I hope more nations learn to manipulate their enemies in such ways. The truth is the Americans could have simply held us behind barbed wire until the war ended. Instead, they chose to invest in our futures. That investment has paid dividends far beyond what anyone imagined. She gestured to her colleagues from Asia. We four women in this room have trained more than 50,000 people in modern domestic technology. Those people have trained others. The knowledge shared in one Arkansas prison camp has transformed lives across an entire continent. That evening, the former Camp Jerome group gathered for dinner at a restaurant overlooking the Potomac. They reminisced about those early days of confusion and wonder, laughing at memories that had once seemed impossible. Do you remember, Yuki asked, when we thought the machines might be drugged, that touching them would poison us? And the first time we tasted the soap, Sachiko added, I thought it was too good to be real, that it must be reserved only for Americans. Mrs. Thompson smiled quietly, listening to her former students recall their transformation. "I remember being afraid," she admitted. "Afraid that teaching you would somehow diminish American advantage. But Captain Morrison helped me understand that true strength comes from lifting others up, not keeping them down." Keiko raised her glass. To washing machines, she proposed, the most unlikely instruments of peace in human history. To washing machines, the others echoed, their laughter carrying across the restaurant. As they finished their meal, Keiko looked out at Washington's illuminated monuments and reflected on how far they had all traveled. From enemies separated by war and propaganda to friends united by shared purpose. From prisoners and guards to colleagues building a better world. The washing machines had been catalysts for that transformation, mechanical ambassadors that demonstrated through simple function what diplomacy alone could never achieve. Tomorrow, they would return to their respective countries and continue the work of spreading knowledge and building prosperity. But tonight, they were simply friends, grateful for the unexpected journey that had brought them together. By 1965, the washing machine revolution had transformed not just individual households, but entire economies across Asia. What had begun as a prisoner education program in Arkansas had evolved into a regional industrial movement that created jobs, raised living standards, and demonstrated the power of technology transfer as an instrument of peace. In Tokyo, Keiko's technical college graduated its 1,000th student, a young woman from rural Kyushu who would return to her village to establish a repair service for the appliances that were rapidly becoming standard household equipment. The graduation ceremony included representatives from American and Japanese appliance manufacturers, government officials, and former Camp Jerome prisoners who now held positions of influence throughout the region. Mrs. Thompson, now 72 but still active as an educational consultant, delivered the commencement address. She spoke about the unexpected journey that had brought them all together, from the fear and suspicion of wartime to the cooperation and friendship of the present. 20 years ago, Thompson told the graduates, "I taught enemy prisoners to operate washing machines because it was my job. I never imagined those women would become my dearest friends, or that the skills we shared would transform an entire region. You are the inheritors of that legacy. Use your knowledge wisely and generously." The appliance industry throughout Asia had matured significantly. Japanese manufacturers now competed with American companies not just on price, but on innovation, developing features specifically suited to Asian households. Korean and Taiwanese factories produced millions of units annually, employing hundreds of thousands of workers. The economic impact extended far beyond the appliance sector. The reliable supply of washing machines freed women from hours of manual labor, creating time for education, employment, and community involvement. Studies showed that households with washing machines had higher rates of female literacy and workforce participation, demonstrating that domestic technology could drive social change. Keiko had been invited to lecture at Harvard Business School about the economic development model pioneered through the Camp Jerome program. Standing before a classroom full of future business leaders, she explained how investing in former enemies had created markets far more valuable than exploitation ever could. The key insight, she told the students, was recognizing that prosperity is not a zero-sum game. When America helped Japan develop its appliance industry, both nations benefited. American companies gained access to Asian markets, while Japanese workers gained skills and employment. Everyone rose together. A student raised his hand with a challenging question. "But Miss Tanaka, did America not create its own competition by sharing that technology? Would they not have been better off maintaining their monopoly?" Keiko smiled, having heard this question many times. "In the short term, perhaps. But consider the alternative. A impoverished, resentful Japan might have turned to other powers, creating instability. Instead, prosperity and partnership created lasting peace. Besides, the competition forced American manufacturers to innovate, making them stronger in the long run." That evening, she received a call from Sachiko in Seoul. The South Korean government wanted to replicate their model for other technologies, establishing training programs for electronics, automotive repair, and industrial machinery. Would Keiko consult on the expansion? Of course, Keiko replied. This is exactly what we hoped for. The knowledge continues to spread. As she prepared materials for the Korean project, Keiko reflected on how completely the world had changed since that frightening day when she had arrived at Camp Jerome. The prisoner who had been amazed by washing machines now advised governments on industrial policy. The enemy who had expected cruelty had found kindness and education. The woman who thought she would die in captivity had instead discovered a life purpose beyond anything she had imagined. The washing machines still hummed in homes across Asia, each cycle cleaning clothes and sustaining the prosperity they had helped create. But more importantly, they remained symbols of a different kind of victory, one achieved through generosity rather than vengeance, through sharing rather than hoarding, through seeing former enemies as future partners. On a crisp autumn morning in 1970, Keiko Tanaka returned to Arkansas for the first time in 25 years. Camp Jerome had long since closed, its buildings repurposed or demolished, but the site had been preserved as a historical landmark recognizing the unexpected role it played in post-war reconciliation and economic development. She stood where the laundry facility had once hummed with the sound of 12 washing machines and the voices of women discovering a world they had never imagined. Now only a commemorative plaque marked the spot, but the impact of what had happened here rippled across continents. Mrs. Thompson, now 77 and walking with a cane, stood beside her. They had made this pilgrimage together, two old friends returning to the place where their unlikely partnership had begun. "Do you remember the first day?" Thompson asked, "when you thought we were going to starve you or worse?" Keiko smiled. "I remember being terrified, and then confused, and then amazed. I spent so many years trying to reconcile what I had been taught about Americans with what I actually experienced. In the end, experience won." They walked slowly around the preserved grounds, reading plaques that told the story in multiple languages. One marker explained the technical specifications of the Bendix automatic washers that had so astonished the prisoners. Another quoted from letters the women had written attempting to describe the impossible abundance they witnessed. A third listed the names of prisoners who had gone on to establish training facilities across Asia. Behind them, a bus arrived carrying students from the University of Arkansas studying international development. Their professor, a young woman whose grandmother had worked at Camp Jerome as a guard, guided them through the site, explaining how prisoner education had become a model for post-war reconstruction programs worldwide. The students gathered around Keiko and Thompson, recognizing them from their textbooks. One young man asked a question that still puzzled scholars decades later. "Miss Tanaka, why do you think the washing machine program succeeded when so many other attempts at cultural exchange failed?" Keiko considered her answer carefully, drawing on 7 decades of reflection. Because it was honest. The Americans did not pretend to be something they were not. They showed us their real prosperity, taught us real skills, and treated us with real dignity. We could have remained enemies forever if they had simply imprisoned us. Instead, they invested in our futures, and that investment paid dividends no one predicted. A young woman raised her hand. "But were you not angry, being held prisoner while learning to admire your captors?" "That is the complexity of human experience," Keiko replied. "Yes, I was angry about the war and the suffering it caused. But I was also grateful for the education and opportunities one received. Both feelings coexisted. The washing machines became symbols of that complexity, reminding us that even enemies can find common ground through shared humanity." As the students departed, Keiko and Thompson sat on a bench overlooking the site where the barracks had once stood. The Arkansas countryside stretched before them, peaceful and prosperous, unchanged in its essential character from that day, in 1943, when a frightened textile worker from Nagoya had first glimpsed it through a truck window. "We changed the world," Thompson said quietly. "With washing machines." Keiko laughed softly. "We changed the world by seeing each other as human beings. The washing machines were just the tool that made it possible." That evening, at a dinner hosted by the State Historical Society, Keiko delivered what would be her final public speech on the Camp Jerome experience. She spoke of transformation and reconciliation, of the unexpected paths that lead to peace, and of the enduring power of education to bridge divides that war creates. When I first saw an electric washing machine, she concluded, I could not imagine taking one home. It seemed too miraculous, too impossible for someone like me. But my teachers at Camp Jerome understood something profound. They knew that showing generosity to enemies, sharing knowledge freely, and treating prisoners with dignity would create something more valuable than any military victory. They created partners. Today, washing machines hum in millions of homes across Asia. Each one cleans clothes, yes, but each one also tells a story. A story of enemies who became friends, of fear that became trust, of war that became peace. That is the legacy of Camp Jerome. Not the machines themselves, but what they represented. The possibility that even in our darkest moments, we can choose understanding over hatred, generosity over revenge, and partnership over domination. She sat down to sustained applause, but her eyes found Thompson across the room. They exchanged a knowing smile, two old women who had witnessed and helped create one of history's quieter miracles. The transformation from prisoner and guard to friends and partners. From enemies divided by war to colleagues united by purpose. From a world where such abundance seemed impossible to one where it had become ordinary. The washing machines of Camp Jerome had indeed changed the world, one cycle at a time.